Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode. This is Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections, and you are listening to the Networking RX podcast. Today, I want to jump into the topic of conversation, a topic that we will continue to talk on from time to time. Conversation is intertwined with our relationships, personal and professional, so it's certainly important to revisit. I guess before I move on, I certainly want to thank those who are listening. I neglected to do that. Thank you for listening, thanks for tuning in, and thanks for subscribing. At any rate, I stumbled across an article in Psychology Today. It was a prior issue. I try to hang on to these and page through them. Some of the stuff in Psychology Today is fascinating. Some I could totally do without. But I think there's something there for, well, I don't say everybody, but everybody who's interested in psychology. But there was an article in the November-December 2019 issue, and the title of the article is How to Dazzle in Conversations. Tips to Nurture Close Relationships or Shine in New Ones. This is by Abigail Fagan. At any rate, she starts out the article, she's talking about, us being boring, or not us being boring, but people being boring, and really what that means and why it's important that, we be exciting or non-boring, I guess would be the term. And she writes, we evolved to focus on the interesting because that involved food, mates, and predators. Actually, she didn't say that. She quoted a personality psychologist, Mark Leary, who is a professor emeritus at Duke University. At any rate, she goes on in the article then to talk about not being boring, but just giving some tips on, on how not to be boring, how we can do a better job in our small talk conversations. And so she goes through, and I thought it was an interesting article because, I find it always interesting when people are citing research, things that are actually been done out there. It's easy just to kind of come up with your own conjecture, do this, do that. But when you're actually pointing to studies that are out there, to me, I find that fascinating. Anyhow, she goes through 7 things that you can do to be more dazzling in conversation, that I can do to be more dazzling in conversation. At any rate, the first thing she talks about is, she says, curb your complaints. When they, have done a few studies to explore this, Mark Leary did of Duke University, and what they did was they studied what made people to be perceived as boring, and the item that topped the list was continually complaining about your problems or negative egocentrism. People don't want to hear that. Now, she mentions in the article, Abigail mentions in the article, listen, if you're talking to a close friend, and venting, that's probably acceptable. But if you're talking to somebody on a plane, they're not going to want to hear you vent for 20 minutes. It gets old. And I think we've all been on both sides of this. If you're honest with yourself, I know I've been on the side of listening to people's complaints. And it just gets old after a while. It's like, oh my gosh, can we end this conversation? Of course, you don't say that. You try and politely endure. And I know from time to time I've spewed complaints. And obviously, I talk to my wife. We talk about these things all the time. She shares her challenges with me as well, and that's just part of a marital relationship or a close relationship. But it's not every day, and it's not. It's not forever. We go on a 4-mile walk every morning, and we talk about lots of things, and certainly, venting and complaining about work and people do come up, but it never dominates the whole conversation. It would get old. we all need to let off steam occasionally, but we need to kind of pick our moments. Is really what she says here, and I think there's certainly some truth to that. So the first thing is curb your complaints. The second thing was ask follow-up questions, and some interesting comments in here. She says, if people enjoy being asked questions, they love being asked follow-up questions. It's, it's almost kind of a duh statement, but I guess it's sort of insightful. From time to time, and she alludes to this in the article, from time to time you feel like you're intruding too much when you're asking questions. And obviously there are certain things that people don't want to get into, and hopefully they will let you know, and you kind of know where the line is, or you should know where the line is, or if you can see somebody, you can see in their body language that, okay, wait a minute, you've kind of crossed the line here. But she quoted in the article, she said in the article, many people feel that by asking a question, they'll come across as nosy or rude, especially ones on sensitive topics. But then she cites a study here that it's a 2017 study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. And what they did was they followed speed daters, and they found that those that asked just one more follow-up question in each meeting led to an additional date. So those follow-up questions, not just the first question, but the follow-up questions will serve to deepen the relationship, and in this case the dating relationship, to get one more date. How that translates into the professional world, I'm not exactly sure, because we all sell different things, but what they've demonstrated here is, the initial question is nice, the follow-up question is even better. And what tends to happen in conversations is you ask a question and there's an answer, and you can kind of feel that lull, like, oh my gosh, this is dying. And what a good follow-up question can do is can kind of keep it going. Imagine, if you will, the jugglers at the circus spinning those pie plates, and the plate's going well with that first question, and when it starts to wobble a little bit, that follow-up question kind of gives it some more momentum. So nobody likes to be peppered with questions, but certainly to ask one or two follow-up questions as to oh, where'd you grow up? Oh, interesting. You grew up in Topeka, Kansas. That's great. How was it growing up there? Tell me about your childhood. What was your high school like? What's the is there a predominant ethnicity there? Whatever it might be. Who's the sports team? Is it the Kansas City Chiefs, or what's the big sport? If you go to St. Louis, baseball is bigger than football. And you go to other towns, you go to Minneapolis, and hockey's probably bigger than football. So anyhow, those are types of questions, follow-up questions that you can ask. Third thing, just to recap: 1, curb your complaints; 2, ask follow-up questions. Third topic was, or the third thought for being more dazzling in conversations, is change the topic. Change the topic from time to time. And we've talked about that with respect to small talk. You start with small talk, you start with personal stuff, and you slowly move over to business, and you talk about business. But even within those talking about business, you can be talking about their business. You can be talking about business in general. You can talk about other people's businesses, and hey, what did you think about that? What are the interest rates doing, to your business? What's the price of gas do to your business? Things like that. And you can kind of still be talking about their business, but kind of changing the topic along the way. Same thing with respect to personal. Oh, you're here from Topeka. Have you, do you still follow the teams there? Do they have a minor league baseball team? So on and so forth. And again, it gets awkward if you're constantly changing the topic, but again, when you change the topic, you're kind of adding a little more momentum to the conversation if done right. Great point. The fourth thing she mentions is convey interesting body language. When you get into conversation, you can kind of tell when you're starting to lose the other person. Even on Zoom, you can start to tell you're losing the person. Their eyes wander. They're not as engaged. And the point she makes in here is that you can combat that. You can have people be more engaged with you by being more engaged with them. We have these in our brains. We have these mirror neurons. We mirror what other people we mirror what other people are doing. They cross their arms, we cross our arms. They yawn, we yawn. If we're leaning in and we're engaged in the conversation, sharing, looking them in the eye, they're more likely to match that behavior. So if you want to have a more engaged conversation partner, convey it in your body language that you're interested in the conversation. Thought that was certainly interesting. You have to really kind of think about it, but it makes sense. If you're starting to lose them because they're bored, demonstrate that you're into the conversation. All right, fifth item. To recap, curb your complaints, ask follow-up questions, change the topic, convey interest with body language. Fifth thing, demonstrate a sense of humor. Obviously there are things that are just off, out of bounds. I don't ever think we abandon humor. I don't think we ever abandon humor. There's plenty of things to laugh about that don't have to touch politics, gender, religion. There's just plenty of things to talk about. There are sports teams. There are comedians saying things. There's the weather. There's the local economy. There's all sorts of little ironies that are out there, and we should touch on those things. What talks about in here to do is to draw a 2x2 grid. Just a 4 squared box, more or less. And on the one side would be whether you're humorous or not, and on one axis whether you're humorous or not, and the other axis is as to whether you enjoy somebody's humor or not. And obviously you kind of mark the various quadrants, and you can be yes, 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 no, no, yes, no, no, which she basically says is, listen, avoid being the no, no. Avoid being the person that doesn't like humor, doesn't like to convey humor, and doesn't like to hear humor. But if you're somebody who can appreciate somebody else's humor, great. If you're somebody who can share humor, great. And you may not necessarily appreciate somebody else's humor. If you're somebody who can do both, you're probably in the best position of all as far as being a great conversation partner. As she starts out the little segment, laughter can make any conversation more delightful. And there's psychology to it, there's biology to it. When we laugh, we give off hormones. Laughing is akin to being scared. So it's things are happening within our bodies that kind of make us feel good. So kind of interesting. And she does cite a study in here that was done in 2016, and it was reported in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. More or less, the study says is that funny people are seen as having a higher status than people who don't crack jokes. So you want to elevate yourself, elevate your humor. Number 6, be vulnerable. Be vulnerable. One of the researchers in here that she cites did a study, and the study found that when people revealed their failures on the path to success, it reduced listeners' feelings of jealousy. And the reality is that we're all very familiar with our own failures. I'm very familiar with the person who blew me off on the call yesterday. I'm very familiar with the person who just flat out told me no on LinkedIn. I'm very familiar with those things. Most people don't see those things. They see the successes I have. And I obviously don't want to get into complaining because that's boring. But if I do share that, I have bad days too. I have bad days. I have networking partners that really don't work out. I guess they're not networking partners then. I have some that are great, absolutely great. Lots that are absolutely great, but I have things that don't work out too. And we all have these sort of setbacks, and it's great to kind of share those things so people have a good sense as to, our success is natural. It just didn't come out of nowhere. So first 6 items: curb your complaints, ask follow-up questions, change the topic from time to time, convey body language, convey interest in your body language, demonstrate a sense of humor, and be vulnerable. And the last item that she cites here is catalog successes. If you have a story or something worked in one conversation, note that and find ways to use it in other conversations. I mean, essentially you're copying yourself, so it's not technically plagiarizing. But if you have an interesting or funny story that resonates with one person, it's probably going to resonate with somebody else. And not that you just fire them out there. You've got to obviously pick your moments. But note the things that work. And professional speakers do this all the time. Comedians do this all the time. When material hits, they note it. And they hone it and try and make it better, but they use it over and over and over again. And it's kind of the same thing with respect to conversation. When materials hit, you need to, use it over and over and over again. One of the things I say when I talk to people and kind of give my journey as to where I'm at, I tell people when I went into the private practice of law, a funny thing happened. The funny thing was that nothing happened, and that always kind of gets. I can see that gets a rise out of people because they're not expecting me to say that. They're expecting the funny thing to be something funny, not that there was a failure there. And so I continually use that when I'm engaged with somebody in conversation. So great article. If you can get it, it's worth reading. How to Dazzle in Conversation. It's in the November-December 2019 issue of Psychology Today. I'm sure you probably could do a search online. Abigail Fagan, Fagan, is the author. To wrap up things, remember we're looking for entrepreneurs and enterprising business types to join our team as franchisees of AmSpirit Business Connections. This is a unique franchise opportunity because our groups mainly meet in the morning. This franchise is great for these business types to add on to what they're already doing. So for a couple hours in the morning, a few days a week, they're working our franchise, and then the rest of the week, they're attorneys, accountants, realtors, and consultants of various kind. So not only do they realize a financial gain from working the AmSpirit Business Connections franchise opportunity, but the business networks that they create in getting that return also help them with their other businesses as well. So perhaps you know somebody, perhaps you are somebody. Whatever the case, to learn more, reach out to me. If there's somebody you want to connect me to, have them email them, and then just copy me on the email connecting us, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.